Okay, good afternoon to you all. Welcome to the Staffordshire Police and Fire and Crime panel. And today is Tuesday, the 21st of February. And I'm Councillor Richard Cox, Vice Chair, taking the chair in the absence of Councillor Bernard Peters, who is convalescing from an operation. If I can move to the agenda, apologies, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have received apologies from the Chairman, Councillor Peters, Councillors Barnes, Councillor Lees, who sent a substitute, Councillor Merrick, Mr Bowen and Councillor Spencer, who the panel had invited with safeguarding responsibilities.
Okay, thank you. Yep, thank you. Item 2 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Does any of the members have any particular interest? As usual, if something does come to mind as we're going through the agenda, please indicate it's not too late. We then go to item 3, which is questions to the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner from members of the public. You will have had them distributed, the questions and the responses, so we take those as read. And I would invite Mr Riley. Are you wishing to make any supplement question? It would have to be a supplement question. Okay. Yeah, if you'd like to come down to a mic, and then we can, if you could ask your question accordingly. Okay. So it will be a question. You press the button there, and over to you, sir.
First of all, thank you very much for the information provided to me. I appreciate that. The question would be, with that information, would it be possible that the Commissioner's Office could provide that information on their websites every year, rather than people having to ask for it?
Commissioner?
Thanks, Mr Riley, and I'm pleased actually that you raised these questions about the consultation, because I think it's really important that I'm hearing from members of the public in terms of council tax, and that's why we put together such a comprehensive report, and that report comes publicly to this meeting as part of the budget and precept setting meeting. It's a very thorough document. It's in the public domain, and it's part of the agenda at the police budget and at the fire budget in full detail. The numbers of people who've participated, their comments, the outcomes, and indeed the final percentages. I don't think we can do more than that, and those agendas do stay on the Commissioner's website actually for longer than a year, and we'll continue to do that.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Riley. Mr Bradbury, are you wishing to make a supplement question? Okay. Thank you. So, moving on then to our agenda. Item 4, decisions published by the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner.
No decisions have been published since your last meeting, Chair.
Thank you very much. So moving on then to 5, the police effectiveness, efficiency and legitimacy, the Peel governance report. Would you like to make an opening comment, Commissioner?
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon to you and panel. Thanks for asking me to come to the panel this time just to explain really the process that me and my team go through in endeavouring to hold the Chief Constable and in a very similar way the Chief Fire Officer to account for the performance of the service. I see this as an absolutely vital part of my role as Commissioner. And ultimately, the measure of whether it's successful or not, my holding them to account, is whether that performance is, first of all, visible, open and transparent to the public, which I think is key, even if we're failing. But then my own measure would be that we contribute to the performance going in the right direction, and we're able to evidence that our involvement has had a positive impact on what is ultimately for the two lead chief officers to deliver. They are responsible for the operational performance of the organisation. The ultimate tool at my disposal, if you like, is to discuss the process, discuss the progress, and maybe even consider engaging different chief officers. Now, you'll know as a panel that we took the opportunity to engage new officers not long after I was elected, almost 2 years ago now. We've got two fine chiefs in place, and particularly in the Chief Constable, I sought to engage somebody who had been through a process, was part of a team that had taken a force, a similar force, from, let's say, not the best position to a much better one. And in Chris Noble, who came from Humberside, he was absolutely part of the team that's responsible for taking a force from almost bottom of the league to very much top of the league, according to their most recent assessment. I was delighted to get him, and a year or so in, I'm more than delighted with the progress that he is making. Now, during that time, you will be aware, the public are aware, that we had our HMIC FRS, inspection. And during that, they identified two areas of particular concern, which took us into a process called Engage. Not special measures, as shorthand taken by the media. It's a formal process, one where we are subject to more regular monitoring, but very much a process where the resources at the disposal of forces are presented and required to assist us in making progress out of Engage. And I think what I would say is that having personally been involved in the meetings in London as part of this process, what they call PPOG meetings, where it's quite heavy. This is a team of experts, inspectors, Home Office and others, with interest, College of Policing, National Police Chiefs. They're all asked at the end of those meetings, okay, what are you going to do to assist Staffordshire in their journey out of Engage? So I've seen, for myself, the real ambition, particularly of the new lead inspector, Andy Cook, that there's a proper collaborative process here. And why not? It's about a team where there are experts in other force areas, at our disposal, experts in the College of Policing, making themselves available to assist us. I think the process is robust, and I was very encouraged several months in. We had a review of the progress. Two elements to it. One is around our contact, and particularly identifying vulnerability when people contact Staffordshire Police. Absolutely essential that we do that. It's important to be responding to people most at risk as soon as we possibly can and prioritising them accordingly. And the visit we had in December concluded in a release in February that we're making good progress. They can see the progress that we're making there. The other element in the engaged process is around effective investigations. A more substantial challenge, I think, one that is actually mirrored in most appeal reports for other services at the moment. We are one of 6 forces in Engage. It's common that effective investigation is in those other force areas as well. And not unlike Greater Manchester, who were challenged around their contact, we have made considerable progress in that, but continue to need to make more progress on effective investigation. Realistically, it might be another 6 to 12 months before we see the evidence of the work that's gone in there to improve, because it's more of a system redesign, whereas contact, by engaging technology, more staff, and improved process, you can see results very quickly, and we have. So I've been encouraged that HMI, external independent inspectors, were uncomfortable with some stuff. They are now far more comfortable about those particular areas of concern, and they continue to work with us. In fact, you'll see through this process we're going to take you through today with the slides. I was very anxious that you and the public had a very clear understanding of just how robust and rigorous our oversight is. It is not just me and the Chief Constable having a chat every week. We do have a chat every week, and there are some things in those confidential meetings that will go to performance, pace of improvement, and areas where we're not where we want to be. But the formality around our meetings, as you'll see, is quite considerable. Now, this has changed since I took office a couple of years ago. It's changed in one particular respect, and I think this is something that is very important here in Staffordshire, but elsewhere as well. I didn't want to be offered reassurance as a commissioner or a commissioner's office of performance. I wanted to know how the service was managing and monitoring its own performance. And we have a Chief Constable who was comfortable and prepared to invite us into that process. So my office are engaged in nearly all key performance meeting opportunities. We see performance that the officers see, that the staff see, and that the senior leaders see. No alternative view for us, no different presentation for us. It's absolutely vital. In other public services, quite often the governance says that's not what was presented to us. An independent organisation will say you're underperforming, and they will say, well, we didn't know. Absolutely essential, warts and all, I want to know. Not only is that important to me, but I then take that performance, as you know, because a number of you have attended the public performance meetings, and with my Chief Fire Officer, my Chief Constable, we go through the performance, as we did in January. Essentially, the information you're seeing here, many of the charts, many of the tables, again, good, bad, and ugly, are there in the public domain. We discuss them. We talk about the demands, the challenges, what's changed, what's being done to address issues. And that goes fundamentally to my promise around open and transparent understanding of what the service is doing. In terms of the panel's role, I think it's really important that you are assured that these processes are rigorous. But it is not, as you know, for the panel to scrutinise the performance of the service directly. That is for me. It's an absolutely essential understanding, I think, that the chief officers are not here to take direct questioning around this. But you might see, whilst we've met every week for 3 weeks, Chairman, you might see that we'd be here every other day, all year round, if you were to take that on, and it's not necessary. That's what I do full time. So I hope that gives you a bit of a sense of where we're going to go. Delighted, I've got Victoria Farrow with me today. Vic leads the governance within our team, highly experienced, and she's going to take us through some of the formalities and the process here. I'll pick up towards the end on some of the direction of travel of HMI with their peel inspections and so on. And of course, Louise, my Chief Executive, is here because I think it's important also to realise commissioners aren't forever. I don't intend to be here today, gone tomorrow. I intend to stick about. But if I don't, I want the practices we're putting into place here and the corporate knowledge within my team to carry performance forward after whatever happens next May. It's not helpful, I don't think, for commissioners to have different approaches or different levels of understanding. So having that expert executive team around me is important as well. So, Chairman, if it's all right with you, I'm not quite sure how we're going to go through the slides. Are they presented or have we got them in paper form?
We had a paper form.
Okay.
Certainly, Mr. Adams, we have discussed, obviously, what you've just highlighted in many ways, that we address what you're doing opposed to what the Chief Constable's doing. We appreciate that it's not our role to directly scrutinise him, it's to scrutinise your good self. So we're clear on that, and I'm happy to take questions at this stage if we're all ready, Commissioner.
Well, Chairman, it's up to you. Do you want Victoria and I just to go through the slide pack first briefly, or should we go straight to questions?
I mean, do you want to just a brief report through? Yeah. So if you could, yes, please.
Is that okay with you?
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just take you through the 3 main slides that start the pack off, and this gives you an indication as to the oversight that the office has on behalf of the Commissioner and how we provide assurances back to the Commissioner on certain elements within the police force and their operations. So within the first slide, you can see there that this actually relates to the force internal governance arrangements. It contains all of their board meetings and operational meetings down towards the lower end of the page. Where the office is involved in these and where we have oversight is at the level 3 and the level 2 arrangements, which we class as strategically managed boards. So you can see there, just on the left-hand side, there's a little bracket that shows that we attend all of those level 2 and level 3 meetings. Now, it may well be that we've got an interest in an area that isn't contained wholly, either performance-related or via another means within one of those meetings, and we can dip into those level 4 operational arrangements as and when required. So we just put a request into the force to get those meeting dates and also the supporting papers. If we move into the next slide, you'll see there that the Staffordshire Commissioner's Office internal governance arrangements are shown. And this shows how we as an office operate and also, again, how we provide the Commissioner assurance on certain matters. You can see at the lower level, we've got assurance provisions, which is the public accountability, which is the performance meeting that the Commissioner referred to earlier on. We've also then got the Staffordshire Commissioner's Office public-led assurance and scrutiny functions. Now, these are volunteers, these are members of the public that come in completely independent of both the office and the force, and they are involved in those scrutiny and assurance arrangements for those different schemes that you can see underneath. We've then got the independent scrutiny, which HMI CFRS does form part of that, as does external audit and internal audit. All of those reports, information, any findings or escalations go up into the management triage meeting on a Monday, which is each Monday morning. The senior management team within the office will sit around and discuss for half an hour those meetings that went the previous week and any escalations that are required to go into the Commissioner for consideration. We also have a quarterly information assurance board meeting and then a monthly senior management team meeting, which is where we make decisions and we do operational business for the office. Moving on to slide 3, you can see where those 2 slides culminate in the most senior level of governance within the 2 organisations. So starting again from the bottom, you can see the internal governance arrangements for Staffordshire Police and the internal governance arrangements for the office. Fire is also referenced in here because we have those responsibilities as well. Feature within that weekly management team triage meeting on a Monday. So anything flowing out of the oversight that we have as a team across all of those different meetings filter into that management team meeting. We then give a briefing via the Chief Executive to the Commissioner a little bit later on that Monday regarding any escalations that we might have or information that we want following through. And alongside that, we have the informal meetings that the Chief Executive has as well with the Deputy Chief Constable or the Deputy Chief Fire Officer, as you can see. We then have a formal 2-to-2 meeting, which is where the Chief Constable and the Deputy Chief Constable sit with the Chief Executive and the Commissioner, and they go through all of those escalations. And they may request additional information, they may give actions or decisions relating to those discussions. And if necessary, they will then feature on the strategic governance boards, of which we do have 4. And the reason why we have 4 is we have 1 solely for policing, 1 solely for fire. We have 2 then that sit across the collaborative piece, as we have a legal responsibility for that. So we've got strategic governance board for collaboration, which looks after the shared services element. And because we've got a lot of work on at the moment in relation to estates, we've got a strategic estates board there as well. So those are the 4 most senior level of meetings across both of the organisations in terms of decision making, and it's where the Commissioner makes those decisions that you see that are published on the website.
Chairman, just to pick up on that third slide there, so the way this is designed to work is that my team and I are engaged in performance at the sharp end. If we're seeing stuff that is not progressing or sticking or not being discussed and we think it should be, or it's of national importance and not being discussed, then there's an opportunity for us to escalate that, and Louise and I will generally pick up on that in a 2-2. Now, those are quite candid conversations, and it allows us to perhaps apply a little bit of challenge or make requests about how we're going to pick things up. If necessary, things will then make their way for statutory purposes or in a way for escalation to those strategic governance boards, SGBs. And that's really where we're operating in a full sort of audit mode to try and, where necessary, occasionally we'll be asking for updates, reports, positions on things. But it also gives an opportunity to make formal requests and set actions for the services to come back on. It's a robust process, but one of the main values for me is this is not a different, as I mentioned before, this is not a separate layer of performance monitoring outside of the force and the fire service's current way of doing things. We're not asking them to meet again to address our questions. We're in a position to put our questions into their performance structure and to escalate where there's areas of concern. That means the taxpayer isn't paying twice for performance monitoring, and we're getting everything straight from the horse's mouth. And for me, that is absolutely essential. We're not getting the filtered or even... now, this won't go down well with all the senior officers and staff. Senior officers and staff are pretty good at presenting what they've been told, and from a strategic point of view, are on it. Sometimes it's really useful to hear from the people who are actually doing the work at the sharp end. And to be in performance at the lower level through the boards, people answering to their own team, their own leadership structures, at that level is exceptionally helpful to us. So this is bedded in now over the last 18 months. I think it's working very well. And the test for me was particularly around the peel inspection, where whilst I was, I think, disappointed, and I'm sure the public were disappointed to hear that Staffordshire Police in particular were not quite as good as we'd hoped they were. I wasn't surprised by anything that came out. Clearly the areas for focus, and there's one or two that were slightly into the more operational detail than we would go. It was very helpful to have that external input. But nothing in there was new to me. And that was a good test, I think, even barely a year in, to the governance model. All of this requires openness and a real understanding and willingness to see the services for what they are. And I will just reflect briefly on another area of work that we keep high on the agenda in our conversations with His Majesty's inspectors, which is the child protection inspection that we had a few months before the Peel report. In contrast, we heard at the debrief there from HMI a number of things I didn't know about, and a number of things that caught me by surprise, and a number of things that, quite frankly, I was intensely disappointed in. That was barely 6 months into my term, and I think it demonstrated a service that, whilst it did look at numbers, and it asked questions, and it came up with plans, not to any degree with the same level of effectiveness as they do now. And therefore, it was not just me surprised by what the inspector was saying around some of our child protection stuff, but I could see that officers and staff around that table were equally surprised. They thought they were good in some areas, they weren't even adequate. So we keep that piece of work also high up in our conversations with HMI. And in fact, when we go to talk to them, it's not just about the two areas of concern, it's about child protection as well. And child protection will be part of a re-inspection in the next month or so, actually. So it'd be interesting to see if we've made the progress I hope we've made on that when it's reported back in the summer. So just to take you on into the rest of these slides here, this particular monitoring arrangement. So the traditional approach of the inspectors, quite often they're embedded in the organisation. We've got a good representative who Louise and I met with only yesterday, Arjun. He knows the team now. He's been involved for about 18 months. He knows the way Staffordshire's working. He knows where the reports are and all the rest of it that he needs. They almost have a free roll to roam. They don't visit and go away. They are continually assessing the police forces now, which is the right way to go. They're scanning. They're engaging with us, as we've talked about. We're in this particular process of engage. Just to summarise, in fact, we're saying the two things: identifying vulnerability, effective investigation, and for us, child protection. The PPOG meetings, I think they're quarterly down in London. I do go with the Chief Constable. As I've said, we get directly challenged on performance, and the chair, Andy Cook, will ask the others there to explain how they're helping the regional services. That's different, you know, from 2 or 3 years ago. It's a much closer relationship with the inspectors, and I'm pleased Andy Cook is going to be visiting Staffordshire in a week or so's time to see our service for himself too. I don't believe a lead inspector has done that for some time, decades actually. So we're seeing a different approach from Home Office and His Majesty's inspectors. Forces generally stay engaged for some time. It's typically, it can be 2-3 years, even longer. I'm hopeful we will be out of that process sooner, but as mentioned, we do have to progress the evidence, the improvement around investigation. And we have here just more detail about the performance monitoring. Quite useful to me, actually, because I forget what half these things mean. It takes 2 years to learn the shorthand. The one thing I think is worth noting, you'll see there, we mentioned 2 twos. They're sort of formal annotated meetings. The one-to-ones I have with both chiefs are not. They're private conversations, and that allows us to discuss things which I think are in the public interest in a more candid fashion. We have those in catch-ups, not only with our local rep, Arjun, but I speak with our regional inspector, Wendy Williams, and unlike some areas, when the inspectors debrief the organisations after their visits, I as Commissioner and my team are in those meetings. Now that's actually by invitation of the Chief Constable, because they're being inspected, not me. Nobody inspects me, you hold me to account, not the inspectors. However, absolutely vital, I think, that I'm in those meetings when the team hear firsthand what the inspectors are likely to be concluding in their reports. I actually think in some areas where that doesn't happen, it needs to happen. And if I was government, I'd mandate that commissioners were in those debriefs. And just finally there in the slide pack, there's some reference here to early warning. Now, this is new. We're seeing more national data being collated, and only this morning I heard from the lead of the College of Policing that they're likely to be doing more in this direction in terms of collecting national statistics. I found this exceptionally helpful. We've got some dashboards around crime. We've also got some dashboards around Ministry of Justice measures. It's extremely useful to know if you are top of 43 forces, middle of the road, or at the bottom. One of the performance packs looks at neighbourhood crime. One of those measures was drug-related crime. We were smack at the bottom. I thought, that's good. Got lower drug-related crime than anywhere else. No, not good, because that's a measure really of proactive policing out there, taking drugs off the streets, closing down cannabis factories, etc. It turned out that we were bottom of the list because we were 6 months behind in our data reporting and advising the national bodies of where we were. So, not a problem with drug crime or policing of that, a problem with our backlog on recording, and that was something that came out in the Peel report. No good having data that's out of date, because you'll be completely misrepresented if you do. Pleased to say all those backlogs that were identified in Peel have already been sorted. But the value of the report nationally was to allow us to highlight that. On Ministry of Justice, you'll hear me talk a bit more about this. We've got an issue with how long we take to put together our files, our case files, when the police take them to the Crown Prosecution Service to consider a charge. We are taking 60, 70 days on average. Other places will take a fortnight. There's clearly an issue there, and I have to address that, and I'm holding the service to account for their end and making a visit to Crown Prosecution tomorrow, as it happens, to ask how they're going to help us with that, because it's a team effort and we ain't winning at the moment. So more to come on this early warning type stuff. I'm not entirely comfortable with that description, but suffice to say that we're not relying on our own data. We're not relying just on data from the services. We're also got these national and regional resources where we can draw our own conclusions as to how the service is doing in some areas. It's new and it's very sensible that we've got that. Some chief constables don't like league tables. but I do, and I think more of them are getting used to the idea, actually. So, I don't propose to go through any more of that detail, Chair. I'm guessing you and your colleagues have got some interesting and challenging questions like you normally do.
Thank you, Mr Adams, and a very useful insight. Keith Walker has indicated.
Thank you, Chair. It's good and encouraging to see that there is progress being made against the action plan, and that the force is moving in the right direction. But the situation didn't happen overnight, and the force has been there before, in the not too distant past. Have you been able to identify the 4 or 5 reasons why this decline has happened? Say it hasn't happened overnight. There's obviously been a sequence of events that has led to the situation that the force is in at the moment.
Yeah, and this is the nature of the stuff that we'll consider at every public performance meeting. I've got to say, Mr. Walker, I'm far more interested in getting us to where I want to be than reflecting to too great a degree on how we got there. And we all seem to have forgotten that the country was in an incredibly bizarre situation with COVID in particular. And we'll see some evidence of that in our review of complaints later, actually, and the impact that that had. I think the service lost sight of some of its key... I think it lost sight of what the public expected and what it expected of itself for a while through that period. I think having been an outstanding police service not so long ago as well, there was always a sense that the Staffordshire approach was robust enough to carry through regardless of changes in demand and different challenges and so on. And there were some process choices, some decisions made to meet the amount of money that we got available that were difficult to measure, particularly through COVID. Were they working or not? Some of those really became clear only after the pandemic and when I was probably several months in. And I'm talking particularly around the, not just the speed, but the quality of our response. And that's had a direct impact on the effectiveness of investigation. Effective investigation, as you'll know, given your background, means that people with experience need to have the time to conduct the investigation. Time on the scene, time with the victims, and a real understanding of those that are likely to be involved and to carry out the investigation. Most of our response and investigation team was so stretched in getting to the next call, the time on site was limited, etc. We then made some IT choices, which were the right thing to do, but not necessarily implemented as well as they might have been, which meant that officers had less time to do frontline supervision. And I think a theme through a lot of the findings in the appeal report were around supervisors and experienced officers and staff really going through the process of bringing colleagues on, not so much double checking work, but working through the processes, offering advice and support as a good supervisor does, whether it's a sergeant or whatever stage of the organisation. So the new Chief Constable has been really focused on a lot of core things, right from standards to expectations around supervision, offering people personal reviews, understanding their circumstances, and at the same time redesigning the model as to how we do the bulk of the policing in those neighbourhoods. getting our organisations back to a local response position, taking best advantage of the new officers as they come in. Being frank, I think the organisation had lost its way and was less than expert across the board, not just in the areas identified by HMI. I think the shortcomings would have eventually have shown everywhere. So, to some degree, we've got a bigger task on our hands to get it where we want it again. And in fact, very early on in the, I won't talk too much about the actual detail of the conversations with HMI and Home Office at the PPOGs, but one of the concerns which I think was fair is, are you taking too much on here in trying to fix the problem? Because we weren't saying, here's the solution for contact. We were saying, here's the solution for the whole service. Supervision, better training, senior leaders that are visible and engaged. Not just there's the senior leader, but they're engaged. They're talking to the staff. They're learning from the staff. They're understanding what the officers need to change. They're part of the solution in designing it. They're getting the staff involved, the officers involved. Those are big changes. A new operating model, new expectations, new standards, whether it's around misconduct or uniform or response times, expectations. It's a big ask. And I think they were looking at us and thinking, oi, these guys may be taking on a little bit too much. But it's those foundations that we need to be right if we're going to lift it back into an outstanding service. I hope that gives you a sense, but let's just say it wasn't good enough, and it actually wasn't as good as it thought it was. And the latter was the most damaging thing. Unless you are absolutely open and transparent about your own performance, you don't know where you've got to improve. And the big thing with the new Chief Constable, if there's a service out there that's doing something well, they get invited to Staffordshire. Not just for a cup of tea, but to tell us, how are we doing? What does this look like? How do you do that? Constantly looking to learn and share experience. And equally, very, very positive the other day, the college is so pleased with the approach we're taking in terms of engaging like that, that they want us to help other services who come in to engage or are going through the process by going through the college to show them how we are approaching this. That sort of come in, help us, and then we'll reciprocate is something that I think all of policing can benefit from.
Thank you. Would you like to come back?
Yes, just one final point, please, Chair. Or many of the senior managers that are in place in the force at the moment are probably, or have probably been in place for a number of years and have actually managed or sometimes maybe mismanaged the force through this difficult period. I suspect the people who are going to get the force out of the problem are those delivering the service at the front end, those delivering the service to the customers. Are you confident that they are or have fully bought into the process? And are you confident that the service deliverers have got confidence in the senior managers?
Actually, Mr. Walker, there's not many people in the senior leadership team that were there 18 months ago. One or two out of a couple of dozen. There's been a tremendous stepping up, promotion, people rising up through the process, proving themselves. We've got people at every level who are new, ambitious for Staffordshire, and only recently, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, had 2 new assistant chief constables. One who is a very experienced officer from City of London, big lead on fraud, but excellent capability around serious crime and investigations, She was instrumental in the tracking down and capture of that suspect involved with the fire-related crime in Stoke the other day. So within weeks, hit the ground. And our other assistant, who's come from Greater Manchester, again with huge experience, who's landed. This is a team that the Chief Constable is designing around his own ideal of what it takes to get a service back to outstanding. It looks very different. The morale in the organisation is extremely improved. It was not where I wanted it when I landed. People were not being listened to. People are now not only being listened to, as I said, they are part of designing their own solutions. The operating model took some months to put in because it was important that the officers were able to say where they wanted to serve, the nature of what they wanted to do, and to try and design to accommodate that, and get enthusiastic people in the right places. It just could not be more different. And only yesterday, the inspector, in their informal feedback, was saying, yeah, it's a different place. You're right to ask the question. I understand there's some sensitivities about individuals because nobody was in the police service not to do the best job. However, it was mentioned in the Peel report that there was a distance between the senior leadership and the rest of the service. I'll eat my hat if there's any reference to that in the next one.
Shall we hold you to that? Councillor Brian Jones.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioner, and Victoria and Louise. Similar to Mr Walker, I welcome the improvements, Commissioner. That's really good news. And looking through the papers, the governance arrangements that are in there, both internal and you mentioned the PPOG meetings, sounds really good, and I'm grateful for what you said, Victoria. But ultimately, I suppose, how that filters down to the sharp end and results is what is really important. And I just want to refer to the HMI letter from Wendy Williams on the 10th of February. I appreciate that's just over a week ago. And the bottom of page 1 and the top of page 2, where she refers to summary of findings. Clearly there's been some good work done, but there are clearly still areas. And if I can just highlight one specific point, point E, the force isn't always effectively supervising investigations with no meaningful improvement in this area. So a year later, from when the HMI first came in, there's still no meaningful improvement. So as Commissioner, with all that robust, and you use that word a few times, and it certainly on paper looks very robust procedure, how do you as Commissioner foresee your approach to holding the Chief and obviously the rest of the staff to account for that no meaningful improvement? And how would that work at say, one of the internal meetings that's been referred to?
It was only referred to yesterday at our most recent 2-2. And what's really positive for me is I don't need to say to the Chief Constable, I don't need to bring this up because he brings it up. You know, Commissioner, here's why we're where we are. By the way, this reflects where we were at a visit in December. The report's a little delayed. And a lot of changes, particularly around supervision in terms of the process. Chris is an interesting guy in the sense that he actively involved in the promotion process of the sergeants. I don't think many chief constables are to the degree that he is. They know what's expected of them as supervisors. But they've also been telling him a certain percentage of the time we would like to spend supervising, we're doing X, Y, Z instead. And there are more process-driven changes that need to be realised before that's going to happen. And I'll give you an example without going into too much detail. We've made a decision along with a number of other forces some time ago, because of improved IT, to ask supervisors, sergeants to be more involved in the closure and completion of incident records than was previously the case. Previously, that would have been done by a team of police staff. The advantage is that the officers are closer to the action, or the supervisors are closer to the action of their officers and can intervene and advise and so on. But it means maybe 20-25% of their time they're doing that on the computer rather than talking to those officers. And the balance is wrong. We have real high quality people doing too much admin, quite frankly. Now, moving that in terms of moving IT, redesigning how it works, and bringing the staff in at the back end to do the job instead takes time. And it's going to take months. We won't be where we want to be in terms of the whole picture on supervision in particular and inspection, I don't think, for another year. And when Wendy Williams in her letter says there are things that still need to improve, if there weren't, we'd be out of engage. And we'd have been out of engage within 6 months or so, which is unprecedented. It doesn't happen like that, not when you're changing the foundations of the organisation. So at the moment, I'm not concerned because I know how much is being done to address the changes, and I also understand they take some time. I think another thing to reflect, the Chief recently did a podcast. It's mostly at a policing audience, but it's an interesting listen, because apparently the service, the supervisors, have been asking for personal development reviews. And the bloke doing the interview said, that's a bit unusual. The staff and officers don't normally like that sort of stuff. And he said, yeah, but mine do, because they want the feedback. You know, how am I doing? Can I go on to promotion now? Where am I letting the team down, or where can I help? I think when you've got a team saying they want that engagement, they want more feedback from their supervisors, you can see that we weren't in the right place before. They actually strive for it, and they want it. There's an appetite for it. And again, that just takes a while to get in, because it means finding time, changing timetables to allow people to spend an appropriate amount of their days on this stuff. Meanwhile, I'll make no excuses. You've seen the charts, you've seen the stuff at Public Performance. Demand is increasing all the time. So these are busy people. We're asking them to redesign the way they work. Chris is setting very high standards and expectations, and it's not an overnight job to get to where we want to be. To answer your question directly, I'm actually quite comfortable with the progress that's been made. And given the depth of understanding about the challenge, I'm okay with where we are. We investigated, dip sampled, worked through over 1,000 investigations as part of a 3-month audit before drawing conclusions about what we needed to do. So that's half of that time up to that inspection in December was spent really understanding what good looked like and what poor looked like around the inspection. It's the next 6 months where we'll see the results of that work.
Thanks for that, Commissioner. I think looking at the summary of findings, there is a theme around supervision. So I'm reassured what you've said in terms of the Chief's approach and indeed your oversight of it, and I look forward to seeing the results in 12 months. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Hudson.
Yeah, Commissioner. I think how the force sort of got into the situation it was isn't down to you. Wasn't down to the previous Crime Commissioner or the previous chief constables. 12 years or so ago, decisions had to be made to force some of us to retire early. We were A19, so the force lost a massive, massive amount of experience, which you are now having to put back in place. The supervisors, you know, had a lot of experience. You've now got people who are supervising who've probably got 4, 5, 6 years experience. You've got people out there being, as you say, having to deal with demand, and demand is going up. It's a more, when you look at the types of offences that the officers are having to deal with now, they're more in depth. And if you've got less officers, they're going to have less time to do the inquiries, which you have picked up on. So now, I think the positive thing is that the force is now increasing in power, in manpower or officers, and so the future will get better. However, it's not going to happen overnight, and I don't think you're going to see massive improvement in 12 months. I think it's going to take a bit longer than that, but it's nice to see that there are steps of improvement all the way through this journey. And, you know, I'm really looking forward to this force in 5 years' time. I think will be exceptional, provided we keep our eye on the ball, which you are. I noticed that you go to meetings, in the slide you showed, you sometimes go to meetings at the lower level. To me, they're more important than the higher level, because they're the guys that are actually doing the business. And I would focus more on going to their meetings rather than, I know it's important you go to the higher level meetings, but you're going to learn a lot more there. You know, we experienced it. Senior officers will say what people want to hear. The guys at the bottom will tell you how it is. And that's where we will progress. But it is positive, and it's nice to see that we are making progress, but we've still got a long way to go. And I think it's all around supervision. Perhaps when we were in the force, we were over-supervised. There was a real chain of command. Your sergeant checked your worksheet daily, and then every 4 weeks your worksheet in your pocket went to the inspector. And we were quite heavily supervised, you know, and you'd always got your sergeant there to call upon if you needed advice. Over the years, that wasn't possible because you just didn't have enough sergeants around, and they've got a massive area to supervise. So as your numbers progress, and you make sure that the supervisory ranks increase, I think that that's where you'll benefit, and that's where the progress will be made.
Chairman, if I may, totally. In fact, I'm surprised. I can't believe that you and Brian needed a lot of supervisation. Astonished to hear that, but I do agree with you. I've talked about this quite a lot. Crime changed hugely back 2008-10, and in fact those reductions in traditional crime, neighbourhood crime, burglaries, robberies, things like that, violence outside pubs, etc., they are still low. They're hugely lower than they were at the turn of the century, and they've stayed there. However, there's a whole load of other crime that's just come out of nowhere. A renewed or a renew and correct emphasis on domestic abuse in particular, a total and understandable value placed on protecting children, and all of the implications of technology, mobile phones, the internet, fraud, and everything else has not only filled the gap, but it means we got demand all over the place that wasn't there when the numbers were being reduced. I think the numbers were reduced too far. I think we actually had quite a lot of officers in jobs at the time that you didn't need a warrant for. And I think in some cases it was the right time for some people to retire. But it went too far. And I think the decision 3 or 4 years ago now to try and redress that balance was absolutely right. You're right, though. In fact, a good number of our new officers are still in training. We're only just getting the first cohorts in the last year or so who've been through their full 2-3 year training, and we've got more that will be there going forward. we're delighted to have them, the public are delighted to have them, and the rest of the staff are delighted. But it does come with a pressure, because more and more people are mentors, are supervisors, and providing that experience and learning. Be quite significant, actually, in May time, when a key tranche will fill out our neighbourhood policing model, because that will then be the numbers the Chief's aiming for in that area of work. But we've got pressure on rape and sexual assault, pressure on children's protection, exploitation, other high harm areas of work where there's a lot of work being done at the moment to understand how we're going to meet that demand. The supervision thing's key, and just another way of looking at that, and you're right about the performance. Police in particular, fire too to some degree, but police in particular is a very hierarchical organisation still. And it's all very well to respect your boss, but not to the degree that you don't tell them straight. And a healthy organisation, people will tell their boss what's not working as well as what is. And I'm seeing right across our performance, everybody is confident enough to say, if it's to the sergeant or to the chief inspector or to the superintendent, things aren't what they need to be, here's my idea, here's what we need to sort. There's a real sense that it will be heard and appreciated and understood, not a sort of old style, I know best from the top. And that's different from where we were, and it's absolutely essential. You've got to allow people to you've got to allow people to be completely honest about what needs to improve and then set about it, and we're doing that. So you're right, we'll keep going in at the lower end because you do hear it as it is.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, I think the force today is completely different to when we were in. If you saw somebody of the rank of a superintendent, you were in serious trouble. Now you can talk to the chief. And I can remember years ago when I was at Chasetown, Chris Sims sent me an email from the chief constable on first names terms. And I just didn't know what to do because I'd never ever had that before. So it is a completely different animal now. And, you know, you can talk to the chief, the deputy assistant chiefs, chief superintendents, you know, and so it's a lot more open.
Thank you for that. Councillor Anne Edgeler.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation and bringing all your thoughts and aspirations to our meeting. My question really is, children are our future, and I'd like to know what work you're doing with the Chief Constable about child protection, and I'd like to think that at the next meeting you'll bring us an update as to what work's been done on that, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Edger. It's a real focus for us. As I said, it's something that we are not being asked to take back to HMI, but we keep taking back to report on progress. There's a big piece of work being done at the minute around what Chief Constable calls the Public Protection Unit. A lot of children-focused support is in those areas. And we've also got a changing landscape in our county council and city council around safeguarding at the moment. It's of key importance to both authorities that their care of children, and actually the number of children in care as well, keeping them, if possible, safe at home, but understanding exploitation, whether it's for sexual or criminal reasons, it's absolutely a duty of us all to wrap round. And whilst the police are involved heavily in enforcement on this type of work, they are more involved in prevention and working with social workers, children's services around prevention. And my office is actively involved too. We commission an important piece of work around children that go missing, but also those exploited. And we're in the mix with the police and the authorities on just deciding how to take that forward in the next few years. I think it's probably more important than ever. And as Councillor Hudson said, it's probably the biggest difference in policing from a decade ago, is this absolute focus on trying where possible to keep young people safe. And despite the headlines, we are, to a greater degree than ever, more and more children are safe than have been. But every single individual that is missed when they could be helped is an issue for us. I'll go slightly further, actually, with the serious violence duty that's just been brought in. Very pleased to be leading the convening of organisations that's focused on children's well-being as well. That will help us address things like the rise in knife crime, other areas of concern around habits, not just of young people, but specifically around young people and the risks they take, and also around drug and alcohol. Big investments in that, because quite often, for no fault of their own, children find themselves in very disorganised, dysfunctional families who are struggling and they can't look after them. And if we can get to the core and tackle that from the health perspective, we've got a chance of them being looked after by their families again rather than the state. Yeah.
You'd like to come back on that?
Just to say thank you, Commissioner, for the work that you are doing, but it's something that I'll keep on my radar. Thank you.
Thank you, and that actually was a concern of mine, so thank you for raising that, because it was going to be something that I would have said so otherwise. Councillor Irving, is there anything on that child protection side that you'd wish to comment from Stoke?
Well, to say I too am grateful for the work that the Commissioner and the force are doing. Stoke-on-Trent and the North Staffordshire conurbation is the largest concentration of population in the county. In the city alone, we have nearly 1,000 looked after children. And it's important that we get in early to offer protection where it's needed. So really, I'm pleased that we're heading in the right direction. And I really do want to thank the Commissioner for the work that is being done, because it's becoming a mounting problem in large conurbations, perhaps more so than or it may be hidden in the county, I don't know. But we are reaching the point in Stoke-on-Trent where our budgets are being absolutely stretched, because to look after nearly 1,000 children is costing the charge payers of the city a lot of money. And that if we can eat into that and get people at an early stage to take perhaps responsibilities that they haven't done in the past, because we are reaching a point where the system will become broken if we do not take action early enough. And I know that the Commissioner and the force are trying to help in any way they can to do that. So I'm grateful.
Thank you. Commissioner?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Irving. Good to see you. And we, Louise and I, only last week, in deep conversation with your Chief Executive and Leader about this. It's quite rightly top of your agenda. Bigger population in the county as opposed to the city, but similar numbers, similar pressures. And unfortunately, those children are quite often, well, they're overrepresented in crime, overrepresented in prison. They're highly vulnerable. So getting in early and, where possible, fostering other family support and working with families is really the preference. But as I mentioned, there's a slightly moving geography at the moment around safeguarding and so on, and the force have been very quick to redesign themselves. We've now got a chief superintendent who works with the city, a chief superintendent who works with the county, and that line of sight over your care and not just children, the vulnerable, is key to the police delivery. So we will see, I think, changes, but also much more investment in those areas because they are of key concern to us.
Okay, thank you for that. So I think we've come to its conclusion on this particular item. I would like to probably ask the Commissioner that we are due to receive your Commissioner's annual report on Monday the 27th of June. I take a lot of that has been discussed can be captured within that annual report. I don't know whether that would be possible.
Yeah, that report is primarily around the work of the office, the commissioning work, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to stretch that into responding particularly around updates on how we're doing on Peel and also that child-focused work, if that's okay, because there'll be some big decisions made by then. Happy to do that. We'll make a note for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adams. And I think most members will be aware that Mandy has distributed the meetings for the Commissioners and Chief Constables performance meetings. So I'd probably urge members to, now you've got those dates, to attend those and observe the proceedings. So quite crucial within our role, absolutely. So thank you for that. I think the recommendation is just to note. So we thank you for that report. And if I can then move on to our next item, which is agenda number 6, which is the annual update on complaint reviews. Commissioner.
Thanks, Chairman. This is this year's report. A number of panel members will be familiar with this, but just to pick up on some nuances, I think. My office are involved particularly in handling freedom of information requests and also dealing with appeals to complaints, called reviews generally. This is where somebody who's made a complaint, if they're not happy with the outcome, well, not so much the outcome, if they're not happy with the process, then it is me and my team who will step in to consider whether the complaint was properly handled and managed. I think that's extremely important to make sure the process stays robust, but also it gives me an opportunity here to present some of the trends to you in complaints. The good news is complaints are up, and I'm very happy to say that because there's a whole new push to get people to complain if they are not happy with the service. My own view is the best way for an organisation to improve itself is to listen to the people they serve and ask for where they can get better. Interesting, I think, just to note, however, the impact that some things can have. If we look at that chart at the bottom of page 21, and it's the orange line there that's indicating this sort of bouncy but gradual increase over time. Interesting to note, significantly from 2020. Well, that's when we sort of came out of lockdown, and there was some very interesting issues there, particularly around the number of neighbour complaints. A lot of people at home that wouldn't normally be at home, a bit more wound up by their neighbour than they would have been because they could see them and were being annoyed by them. Also, I think a fair mix actually split pretty much 50-50. Complaints about the force being too heavy during COVID, and then the other 50% saying it could be a bit heavier. And I'm quite pleased that Staffordshire got that about right. We really didn't, the police didn't bring too many charges or criminalise too many people through that difficult period. certainly not to the degree of other places. But in this period of time, we've also had a significant public concern about Black Lives Matter. There are more issues at football matches post-COVID than we've had for some time, which has involved complaints in 2 or 3 cases from visiting sets of fans, as well as being an unwelcome drag on police resources, actually, because we need to be there. And we've had some high-profile protests. One of our questioners earlier, who wasn't here today, but I know she was very concerned about activities at Wally's Quarry, and the service received a lot of complaints and concerns about that. I don't see that going away. Protest seems to be a means of expressing ourselves that's more supported than it was. Again, big drag on police resources, but important that people can protest and we protect their right to do so, but hopefully can keep them safe as well. Big push through social media to increase the number of complaints, and that's helped. And anecdotally, but it's there to be evidenced, I think I had something like 250 emails on 2 days last week. A fair chunk of those were people expressing concern, and not all 250, by the way, but certainly a couple of dozen. And quite often we will say to someone, the right route now is to formally complain. This doesn't sound like the level of service you'd expect, go through PSD. And in doing that, the professional services team are able to feed back to the organisation, here's the areas of learning, here are the consistencies and issues. And of course, the national picture is very different from 12 months ago. We had the dreadful murder of Sarah Everard. We had the, quite frankly, detestable and unbelievable reports around that Officer Carrick recently. These things have an impact, and anything that happens, particularly in the Met, the biggest force in the country by some margin, has an impact. People are more likely to see issues that they want to bring to the attention of the police. So there's reasons for the increases. What's useful, I think, when you see the breakdown of the nature of the issues, there's not much change. This is the pie charts on page 26. Similar sorts of things are being reported. The biggest concern is the outcome, if you like. So having an incident or a report being investigated, quite often people are still not comfortable with what happened at the end of it. And I think that will always be the case. Perhaps there's something around helping people to understand what might be the outcome. People do not always get, quite often you might think somebody should be banged up. Well, it's not going to happen. There are other ways of dealing with situations. Quite often there isn't the evidence to pursue an investigation. And if there isn't, there isn't. But I think it's quite understandable that people would be upset in those situations and want to complain. So some of those complaints aren't so much about the service, but the criminal justice outcome at the end of the case. Really positive this year. The complaints team have taken a new view of what it does. It realises that there's a real opportunity to improve the service, particularly by offering a triage. And what we discovered, this is plain common sense, by the way, folks. Most people, when they're phoning in with a concern, if it's quite a lot of people are looking for an apology or some understanding or somebody to appreciate that they've been put out or disadvantaged or inconvenienced. So the triage team are there to make a quick response. And if it's necessary and appropriate for an officer or a team to go back and say, we didn't get that right, sorry, they will take that approach. If that's what the complainant wants. It works extremely well. Nobody wants a 6-month protracted bureaucratic process just to get a recognition up front, we could have done that better and should have done it better. And I was very pleased speaking to our regional IOPC lead the other day. They've been in, they're very comfortable with what we're doing around complaints. No issues from him at all, but also a commendation for the triage approach. He says this is better customer service. You are acknowledging the problem and going back to people very quickly. So the triage is positive. And then we have a moving picture. There's this Schedule 3. The Schedule 3 process is the most formal one, which gives the individual a right to appeal and get the review from my office if necessary. In comparison with other areas, quite low in terms of complaints, quite low in terms of the numbers going to full formality. So I'm reasonably comfortable with all of this. I do keep an eye on this. I am interested, and actually maybe Vic wasn't quite as comfortable with this when I started as I was, but I was very keen to hear from individuals who got an issue. I don't get involved in considering the complaint. That would be quite wrong because it might go to appeal where I would be called on. So I don't get involved, but I want to know what people are complaining about, and I will watch those go through the process. I think it's quite important that I do. I need to hear from the public when they're unhappy about things. And the good news is we've got a senior leadership team that wants the same. They want to understand the process. So there's some, in terms of reviews, apologies folks, what was my number? 56 reviews in the last calendar year. So those came back to me and my team. And of those, we upheld 8. So 14% we actually sent back to the service to say, you need to do this again, you need to look at this again. We're not comfortable with the process. I'd rather it was 0, but actually that indicates I think it's a robust process. And we're quite good on the time it takes to turn complaints around. That was a problem in some services recently when complaints were taking a year or so to respond to. Our average time is 36 days. On the reviews particularly. So, Chairman, I'm waffling a bit. Happy to take some questions.
Councillor Brian Jones and Keith Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No questions, Commissioner, just 3 comments, if I may. The Prevention and Intervention Officer, I think that's a great idea, identifying trends and passing that learning down, really good. I think in terms of the Schedule 3 reviews that you've just mentioned, it was 14% this year, 10% last year. But if you think about that, that's still really, really good because it's only those people who feel aggrieved and then it comes to you and still a very low minority. But as you say, if it was 0% every year, that wouldn't exactly create confidence in the public. So the fact that you found something is really positive. And I think as well the triage facility you've mentioned, as someone who was a shift inspector and it was the want of the role that you would deal with complaints, a lot of colleagues would just take the complaint knowing full well that it wouldn't go anywhere, it would go off to professional standards and come back 3 months later to be told no further action. That doesn't actually do public confidence any good. I used to take the approach where if that was going to be the case, that you sit down and whilst you could never apologise on behalf of the officer, I would quite often apologise on behalf of the police that you felt the need to actually come in and complain in the first place. And from personal experience, people would go away quite happy on occasions, knowing that you'd sat down and listened to the concerns. And whilst I'm sure that's not exactly what the triage facility is, that early intervention to deal with complaints that aren't going anywhere, for want of a better, I think is a real positive step.
Chairman, just on that one, a lot of people call up with concerns. They want to improve the service, and they feel that's what they're doing. You know, it's not to get into some protracted legal discussion. They just want to be heard and they want it sorted, and that's what we're doing more and more often, which is good.
Thank you. Keith Walker.
Thank you, Chair. You touched upon this in your commentary, but the number of complaints as a result of police action following contact increased by 13 percentage points, I think it is. Now, you would probably expect that most people who contact the police contact them because they need help. And the police are the organisation, and sometimes the only organisation that can provide that help. So if the police do that, then the expectation is that the people receiving that service will be pleased with it rather than disappointed with it. And for somebody to make a formal complaint, they must be really aggrieved about the action or the inaction of the officers. So I'm surprised at the number of complaints resulting in contact with the public, because it implies that the more contact there is with the public, the greater the number of complaints. Personally, I would think that the reverse is true. The public, you would expect, would be pleased with the service that they've received. But I'm just wondering whether there's a correlation between that and some of the issues that have been raised in the Peel report.
Councillor Walker, I'm not 100% sure, but my understanding is that the action following contact is a bit of a catch-all for everything that happens once they've been in touch with the police. So that would include things like, it's taken me 2 years to get to court. It might be CPS haven't brought the case to court. It might be delays. It might be experience with the wider criminal justice system. And then it might even be, after all that, the villain got a month when I was thinking he'd go away for 3 years. So it isn't that the contact has triggered a negative reaction. It's the whole experience or outcome from that point on. But I'm not 100% sure. So I would like, with your permission, just to make sure my understanding is correct. Because if it's not correct, I want to understand more about a breakdown of that section of the report. But that's the understanding that I've got. And to a great degree, the majority of those things are not in the control of the police service to change. We're talking legislation changes or wider criminal justice. But I do appreciate they are a huge wind-up for people, and particularly around investigations, no further action because there's a lack of evidence or people don't continue to press a charge or whatever. And people don't see justice being done sometimes. Now, in those cases, understandable frustration, but it isn't actually for the individual police officer or staff member to be able to address that. I'll double check that.
Do you wish to come back, Keith? No, that's fine. Councillor Irving.
Yes, thank you, Chair. On complaints, do you weed out any that you would consider to be malicious before they go into the figures? Or are they all go, do they all go in, or do you sort of filter them first?
They all go in, Councillor Irving.
Right.
They all go in. There are... I was actually quite staggered when I first got elected had a number of individuals who appeared to be bringing really significant concerns to my attention. And it turned out that in many cases, those concerns have been brought to everybody that was newly arrived at Staffordshire Police's attention. It was like, oh, there's a new guy in town. I'll bring my rolling concern. Unfortunately, and it'll be the same in your authority, I'm sure, there are some individuals that, for whatever reason, sometimes they're not very well, or sometimes they just really struggle to appreciate that a process has been exhausted. They will continue to bring complaints. There's possibly not even a handful of people who are essentially blocked from the process, but even then, anything new from them is always considered and brought onto file. And they will know that essentially they have been asked to not continue. It's very tricky because there are some genuinely distressed and upset people, but it's not through the complaints process that they're going to get a resolution.
Right. Just one more point, if I could, Chair. Commissioner, you alluded to the two appalling cases that were reported nationally regarding police officers' misconduct. Do we have any officers suspended in our force? And if officers are suspended, do you have an average time for how long it takes for the complaint to be looked into and for a decision made on the future of an officer, dependent obviously on the seriousness or otherwise of the complaint?
Yes, we do have officers going through misconduct, and in fact, at the recent public performance meeting, we spent some time talking about this with the Chief Constable and Deputy, because numbers are increasing. There's some positive reasons for that, particularly around unwanted sexual approaches, abuse, misogyny, and the environment has helped encourage female officers in particular to come forward, but we encourage it as well. The service is really keen to do that. I'm afraid I don't have the numbers to hand, but there are more than last year, and I keep an eye with a regular update on every individual that goes through the processes. Some are around corruption, some will be around personal behaviours, some will be sexual assault or poor customer service. I'm afraid every service will have them. The measure of the service is how you deal with it. The big issue for me was in the report from the Met actually, was not the volume, it was how long it was taking to deal with them. In some cases, 3 years, 2-3 years. Quite often, there might be a criminal case running alongside the misconduct, and you almost have to wait till the end of that. We've had a couple of unfortunate incidents recently where that was the case, and somebody was suspended for a couple of years. Now, I'm massively frustrated by that because they were ultimately guilty, and we've paid for that. But at the same time, everybody's entitled to justice. However, where it's not necessary, HR move quite quickly to move processes on. And here in Staffordshire, the Chief Constable has zero tolerance of misconduct, and that's the way we'll be going.
Thank you for that. I think that was quite an important question, I think, and I thank you for your response there. I'm also welcome that the very end and conclusion of your report at 5.4, that work is currently being undertaken with the Staffordshire Fire and Rescue Service, with a view of the Commissioner's Office there, with a review of the body for complaints. So we welcome that. And obviously at some point look forward to seeing the appropriate report to the panel for consideration.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. The ever more being done. In fact, the oversight of fire and rescue is very similar. That there are issues there too, as there would be with any large organisation, with occasional misconduct, but also people internally not happy with the behaviour of their colleagues. And dealing with all of that in a consistent and fair way is really very important. So yes, we're going to bring some of the robustness, particularly actually around IT and keeping files and records properly, which is very good. On the police side, we're going to nick that IT for fire and rescue. Borrow rather than nick.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. So that leaves us on this item, the recommendation that the panel note the contents and agree to receive any annual updates for scrutiny at future panel meetings. Are we happy with that recommendation? Yes, Chair. Thank you very much. So moving on then to questions from the panel members to the Commissioner. Do we have any questions to raise? Councillor Brian Jones.
Yes, just a quick one, Commissioner. We've seen in the press in recent days with the events in Lancashire, the way police are coming under ever increasing scrutiny, and especially across social media as well. I just want to ask you in your capacity of Commissioner with regard to asylum seekers within the county. We have a number in Cannock and we have a number in South Staffordshire who are literally on our border. So the perception is there are a lot of asylum seekers in Cannock. I have to say the professionalism of the police officers in Cannock is beyond reproach. The Chief Inspector and Inspector do a fantastic job, great relationship, as I've said before, with the community safety team. Unfortunately, with social media, the police have come in for a lot of criticism, totally unjustified in my opinion, around taking a lack of action. I'll give you one example. An individual who was an asylum seeker was FaceTiming his friend in a park adjacent to a nursery. That quickly came on social media saying an asylum seeker was taking videos of young children. Investigated thoroughly, absolutely not, just FaceTiming his friend. Why would they have done that next to a nursery in broad daylight? But that's another story. That quickly became fact on social media, although it was totally incorrect. So, as I say, they've done a fantastic job, but we've had a protest in Cannock with possibly more to follow, again policed exemplary. But I have a concern that both local authorities and the police are coming under fire for things outside of our control. I.e. it's because of government policy. We know it's a difficult thing. Getting to my question, is there any political will that you can bring to this conversation with government to actually say the difficulties that local police and, dare I say, councils are facing with being blamed for things completely out of their control?
Yeah, this is going back. I was in a meeting yesterday with the policing minister. It's definitely on his radar, and your MP, Amanda Milling, raised it with me only a couple of weeks ago in one of our updates before that protest. Positive, I think, that other protests we were expecting have been cancelled, and I'm pleased, actually, that some of the individuals involved saw what happened in Liverpool. Can't remember the name of the area of Liverpool recently, but very similar, motivated and revved up by some parties that have got particular interests, some right-wing interests in triggering violence. Now, the team, as you say, the local team have done a good job. We've also got, through necessity, more experience around protest and manage it. Those things in planning take considerable police resource. Nobody's doing anybody any favours with those types of protests. And I think the more we can get messages out, people know this, but you can't believe everything you read. And quite frankly, you shouldn't. Always ask what is the motivation of some people in spreading this stuff. And, you know, there's not an awful lot of positive stuff to come out from the terrible incident with Mrs. Bully. But if anything, I'm hoping people will wake up to the fact that your own personal conspiracy theory or desire to promote stuff on TikTok and Instagram and all the rest of it is just not helpful. You've got to let the services do their job of keeping us safe. And huge condolences for the family yesterday, but for them in that moment to have a go at the media and say, you know, right at the worst moment they've experienced, and they feel they need to tell television crews and all the rest of it to back off. It's just unacceptable, isn't it? So hopefully people will reflect on that a bit, because there are members of the public that will look at that and think that's unacceptable. But here I am jumping with enthusiasm at a story about a migrant guy with a phone. No. Think about it, because it's dangerous stuff. So it's understood. We're in a situation we're in. I know government is very eager to manage the difficulty as best it can and recognises the issue. But the issue at the moment is not criminality with the migrants, it's the risk of protest violence by those who are not informed and actually vulnerable to some dangerous messaging.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Phil Hudson.
Yeah, Commissioner, you'll know why I'm going to ask you this. What can you do to reassure members of the public, particularly residents in rural areas, that the increase in the number of officers and the relocation of the response teams is effective?
Sorry, Councillor Hudson, so, response teams particularly in rural areas?
Yeah, you know, I represent Crown Ward within East Staffordshire. It's a rural area. Residents ask me regularly about the policing in their area. So I just want to know what we can do to reassure them that we're now getting an increase in numbers. We've relocated the response teams nearer. How can we make them aware that it's effective? Absolutely.
Well, the relocation, the new officer numbers, the increases are not just in the towns and the city. They are all over Staffordshire. There'll continue to be a post at Uttoxeter, which assists in response to the moorlands, and there will continue to be an East Staffordshire. There will continue to be the absolutely essential understanding that we are 2/3 rural here in Staffordshire, and it doesn't matter where the call's coming from, we need to be responding. Now, very early on, I think we had some conversations about the fact we've got a team of officers who have particular interest in rural matters and wildlife matters and other issues of concern, particularly in rural areas. They support the local neighbourhood teams in doing their job, but essentially most crime in rural areas is the same as it is in an urban one. It's just a slightly different environment. And they work very well together. Our response times are coming down, and they're coming down and getting more consistent from the new bases. And as I said before, we've got more time to spend investigating at the scenes as well, which is a good thing. There's still more officers to come along in the next 2 or 3 months, and then I think everywhere will be seeing more of this visibility. At the minute, I'm not seeing any particular upticks in crime in rural areas. The issues with where we are seeing upticks is in things like vehicle crime in particular, and that tends to be along the A38 corridor in the south of the county, so South Staffs through to Burton. Big increases, sometimes 30% upticks on our crime, purely as a result of vehicle thefts. But I won't lose sight of the fact that Staffordshire is predominantly rural, and people do feel sometimes more exposed in those areas, and they are isolated, but response times are actually barely any different. You tend to be going further, but on a quieter road, and that means we get there in the same amount of time as we do in the busiest bit of Stoke or Burton or Stafford. Interested, Councillor Hudson, if you are picking up on trends in your patch or rurally, do let me know. I'd be interested, but I'm not seeing that in the stats at the minute.
Thank you. I think I can resonate with what Councillor Hudson is saying. Possibly that we are receiving more anecdotal than we're actually getting information on actual crime committed. So I think what I'm saying is there's a perception, but I think we have to monitor that and perhaps turn those anecdotal perception comments into the reality in terms that we can then pick up exactly what the crime may be. And I certainly know that there was some sheep stolen in South Staffordshire only in the last week, I think it was. So I think it is recognised that there is an issue there, but I think we've got to address it properly and know that it's been reported properly, and then we can follow up and take what's been said. So, but I do share what Mr. Hudson says there. It seems to be that rural crime to us is an issue that we'd like being moved on a lot at a different pace than probably currently is.
Chair, if I may, the other thing that, report it. If there's an issue, let's get it reported and tracked and chased down. One of the things that the new neighbourhood teams are tasked to do, can't remember the name of the op, but essentially it is really lift the public engagement. And I'm seeing on my social media that we've got officers, PCSOs, getting more and more out and about into the patches. They're in village halls, they're in post offices, local supermarkets, all the rest of it. That visibility all helps to make people feel safe. And then when there's an issue, they can actually talk through the facts then with the local officers and PCSOs as well. Part of the new model, the attraction is they understand the areas. And 6-7 months in now, they know, you mention a street name or a lane and they'll know where you're talking about. That wasn't quite the case a year or so ago. So it's all going, hopefully there isn't a village that won't see their local team in some form or another in the next few months.
Okay, thank you. There being no other questions, no arms raised or in any way, let's move on then to item 8, which is the work programme and our next meetings. The next meeting is scheduled for Monday the 27th of June. We'll see their appointment of chairman and vice chairman, and report of the management of complaints and conduct matters against the police, fire and crime commissioner, and the deputy police, fire and crime commissioner. We also receive a report of the Home Office grant 21-22, and as already mentioned in this meeting, consideration for the Commissioner's annual report, and obviously questions from members of the public. Are we any other items? I think there's a hefty agenda, so I don't want to necessarily add to it, but I might not be sat in this chair, so we will see. But are we happy to note the work programme? Thank you all. And that leaves me to thank you very much for your attendance today. And we've had certainly a busy few weeks, and I appreciate your input to those busy weeks that we've had. Thank you, Mr. Adams and team, for presenting various reports. And on that note, I will duly close the meeting at 3:50, 10 to 4. Thank you very much.